Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about atoms and molecules. Forget about chemistry for a second. Just answer me this. What do you see on your screen? A school, an aeroplane, people, car, buildings. All these are valid answers. But is there a way that you all give the same answer to this question? Well, yes. Chemistry has given us a word that will incorporate everything that you see on your screen right now. And that word is nothing but matter. So, yes, everything that has mass and occupies space is called matter. Well, there goes the definition of matter, but to understand it, anything and everything which you see around you, even if you don't see it, the air around you, you don't see it, right? But it is matter because it has mass and occupies space. So, for the curious minds long back, let's call them scientists, it was very important to ask this one question: what is matter around us made up of, or what comprises the matter around us? Such people used to give theories and philosophies to explain what could be the answer. So the thing with theories is that they could be true or not because they are not based on any scientific experiments, but are just some ideas which develop in curious minds to explain reality. One such theory said that any element, gold per se, if broken repeatedly into smaller and smaller pieces, we will reach a stage which is not any further divisible. A great Indian philosopher, Maharishi Kanad, called this stage Parmanu, and another Greek philosopher, Democritus, called this stage our very own atom. Remember, these were just theories because they were not based on any scientific evidence. On the same lines, having the same idea, an English chemist John Dalton gave his theory, which was called the Dalton's atomic theory, and he spoke about the existence of an indivisible species in matter and called it atom, just like Democritus and Maharishi Kanad. He gave many more postulates which make perfect sense even today, but it was later found out that atom actually is divisible into subatomic particles called electrons, protons and neutrons, about which we will be studying the next unit. But this led to the failure of the Dalton's atomic theory. Now let's discuss one of the most important questions: what is an atom exactly? So as already discussed, if we keep on dividing any element, let's say gold, silver or sodium or any other element, if we keep on dividing it repeatedly, we will reach a point where it is not further divisible, and that point is called an atom. All these atoms of different elements differ from each other based on various properties like its mass and the number of subatomic particles that it has, but we will talk about that another day. Now that we know what an atom is, let's try to understand how small an atom is. Atom is unimaginably small. If I tell you to imagine small things, some of you might imagine a grain of rice, maybe thickness of hair, but to understand how small an atom is, we will do a comparative study here. Let's talk about our planet Earth. It's huge with a radius of about 6,371 kilometers, which translates to these many meters. Since it's a comparative study, we will be comparing all the radiuses in meters to get a clearer picture. Moving on to a smaller level, let's talk about a tennis ball, which has its radius in order of few centimeters, which translates to these many meters. Going to an even smaller level, if I talk about the grains of salt, this is having its radius in the order of few millimeters, which is much smaller than a meter. If we go to an even smaller level, if I talk about bacteria, they have their radius in order of few micrometers, which is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. To go even smaller, if I talk about the radius of a DNA, it's about 2 nanometers, which is about 1/1000,000th of a meter. Now we reach the stage of atoms, which have their radius in the order of few angstroms, which is 10 billionth of a meter. All in all, atoms are small, very small, unimaginably small. The model of an atom which you see on your screen right now is something which we will discuss in the next chapter. So we have spoken about elements like gold, silver and sodium and talked about their atoms in the last few minutes, but we have a total of 180 known elements. Now let's imagine something. Let's imagine that you're a scientist working on an element hydrogen and you have discovered something out of this world, and you take your discovery to a university in Germany, and when you start talking about your discovery about hydrogen, people there are unable to understand even a word because hydrogen is not called hydrogen in their language. Quite a bad day for you, isn't it? So what we need right now to avoid such confusions is common symbols for every element. so that they can not only be understood locally but can be understood worldwide. Dalton again was the first one to understand this issue, and he came up with various symbols of various elements. The problem with these symbols were that they were very difficult to remember and draw. The IUPAC, or International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, which is an international organization which represents chemists and chemistry, came up with the solution. They suggested that every atom will have a symbol which is normally the first two letters of the name of the element. For example, aluminium is Al, argon is Ar, barium is Ba, which is quite easy to remember, right? But if you look closely, you will realize that this does not match in all these names. For example, in sodium, the initials are SO, hence the symbol should be SO, but the symbol is actually Na. That is because in Latin, the name of sodium is natrium and the initial of natrium has been used here. The same is the case of silver, where it is actually argentinium in Latin. Now these 118 elements are arranged in well-defined order and are classified into groups, periods and blocks. This arrangement of various elements is called periodic table, and it is called the periodic table because the classification is based on the periodicity or repeating property of various elements in them. Now in chemistry we have reactions or chemical reactions in which reactants convert to products. Any chemical reaction or combination are governed by basic laws, and those are called laws of chemical combination. Two such laws will be discussed in the course of this video. The first one is the law of conservation of mass. The definition of law of conservation of mass was that mass can neither be created nor be destroyed. This was given by Antoine Lavoisier. To understand what this law states, let's talk about an example. Let's say you have a box and you add two balls in the box. Let's say you close the box and just move away. When you come back and you open the box again, how many balls would you expect to come out? Of course, two balls would come out, right? The same thing is the law of conservation of mass. However number of atoms and molecules participate in the reaction, the same number of atoms and molecules will be made out as products also. For example, here we have 4 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of carbon and 4 atoms of oxygen taking part in the reaction, and they are the reactants. As products, we have rearranged but only 4 atoms of oxygen, 1 atom of carbon and 4 atoms of hydrogen made. This is the law of conservation of mass. The second law is the law of definite proportions. This law states that a given compound always contains exactly the same proportion of elements by weight. This was given by Joseph Proust. Again, let's understand with an example. Let's say we talk about water. Water from your kitchen and water from your, let's say, school. These two are two different glasses of water derived from two different sources. But both are going to have 1 atom of oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen always. So irrespective of the source of water, no matter this water is from your house, my house, Germany, Australia, whatever, no matter what is the source of the water, this will always be having 1 atom of oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen. That is, oxygen to hydrogen ratio is always going to be 1:2, no matter what the source of the water is. This is the law of definite proportions. Now let's talk about how heavy these atoms are, okay? So we know how every element is made up of its constituent atoms. For example, gold is made up of gold atoms. Now if I want to know the mass of this gold atom, what I can normally do is I can just take a weighing balance, and on top of that I can add a gold atom, and whatever mass I can get is called the atomic mass of the gold atom, okay? But one thing is very important to understand, that atoms are very small, unimaginably small, as we discussed in the last video. So let alone feeling them and touching them, we can't even see them, right? So we cannot actually see them, feel them and hold them and put them on a weighing balance and measure their masses, because they are not macroscopic. We can't even see them. So we need a different way by which we can measure the masses of atoms, right? So in today's world we have beautiful techniques. We have very advanced machinery, one which is called a mass spectrometer, in which we can exactly measure the mass of even atoms, okay? But this is what is today. This is the science of today. Many years back, we had scientists, okay, who had just one question: how do we measure the mass of atoms? Something that we can't even see. But one thing I think everybody should remember, that knowledge is always superseding technology. So these scientists did not have technology, but they had one very important thing, which is their knowledge. So they applied their knowledge and they were able to find out the masses of these atoms. Let's see how. So we know what 1 kg is. 1 kg or kilogram is universally accepted unit for mass. So if something is 1 kg in India, let's say, it is going to be 1 kg in US, in Germany, basically everywhere worldwide, because it is a universally accepted unit for mass. So now, atoms are so small that their mass cannot be measured in units like kilograms, grams, milligrams, even micrograms, right? So that is why the need of the hour is we need a new unit, okay, which is going to be used for measuring the masses of smaller things like atoms and molecules. And because we are going to be measuring the mass of atoms, that unit is called the atomic mass unit, okay? So for example, if I take a weighing balance and if I add a ball onto the weighing balance and the weighing balance shows me 4 kg, it basically means that this ball is 4 times as heavy as 1 kg, and 1 kg is a standard. It is a universally accepted standard. So this ball is 4 kg or 4 times the standard weight, that is 1 kg. Okay. Now similarly in atoms, we need a basic universally accepted standard, and that is what the scientists were curious to know, what the standard could be. Now scientists did not know the mass of atoms, right? But they knew one thing, that hydrogen is the lightest of all the atoms. They knew that atoms exist. They knew that every atoms, different elements have different atoms, but they also knew that hydrogen is the lightest of them all. And because of that, hydrogen was chosen as the standard for measuring the masses of different atoms. So because hydrogen was lightest of all the atoms and all the atoms were heavier than the hydrogen atom, hydrogen was arbitrarily given the number 1 atomic mass unit. For example, 12 times the mass of hydrogen atoms is equal to 1 carbon atoms, okay? So mass of 1 carbon atom should be equal to 12 AMU, okay? Similarly, mass of 1 nitrogen atom came out to be 14 AMU, mass of 1 sodium atom came out to be 23 AMU. So basically scientists, this was a huge success for the scientists of that time because they were able to now measure the mass of atoms, okay? So just by knowing how heavy is another atom as compared to that of hydrogen atom, we can quantify them in their masses with respect to AMU or atomic mass unit, okay? But it was later found out that hydrogen itself exists in 3 isotopic forms, which is hydrogen, deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is twice as heavy as hydrogen and tritium is thrice as heavy as hydrogen. Well, that was a very bad day for the scientists at that time, because now what they needed was a new standard, because our standard, our old standard, which is the hydrogen, is now not correct, okay, because now it itself is existing in 3 different forms. So we need a new standard, and the definition of 1 AMU, which is hydrogen atom, okay, initially it was hydrogen atom, should also change. After a lot of thought was given to this, carbon atom was then chosen as the standard, and now we had to somehow change the definition of 1 AMU, which was initially with respect to hydrogen atom, to now being with respect to the carbon atom, okay? So now what we already initially know is that mass of 1 atom of carbon is equal to 12 AMU, which means mass of 1 atom of carbon is 12 times as heavy as the hydrogen atom, right? But because now carbon is a standard, we have to somehow standardize carbon. Standardizing means making it equal to 1, okay? Now how do I make this 12 equal to 1? Think, you can pause this video and think, how can you make this 12 AMU as 1, or what mathematical function can you apply, okay? So I think what we can do is we can just divide both sides by 12, and by doing that we will be getting 12 divided by 12, which is equal to 1, and this, my friends, exactly is the definition of 1 atomic mass unit. So on the right hand side you see 1, which is equal to 1 atomic mass unit. Initially hydrogen was 1 atomic mass unit, now carbon is 1 atomic mass unit, but by making carbon as 1 atomic mass unit, what we have done is we have divided mass of 1 atom by 12 on the left hand side, right? So basically 1 atomic mass unit is exactly the mass unit equal to 1/12 the mass of 1 atom of carbon 12, and this, my friends, is a definition of one atomic mass unit. But you have to be very clear in understanding that atomic mass unit only talks about the mass of atoms, okay? Atoms is something which we can't see, which we can't feel, which we can't touch. An atomic mass unit talks about the mass of those species which we can't see, feel, and touch, okay? Now, so we basically have two kinds of worlds, right? We have this world in which the atoms exist, which is very, very small, which we can't even see, unimaginably small. And then we have our world around us, which is the macroscopic world, which we can see, feel, touch, and everything around us, right? So here we have the mass in atomic mass unit, and here we have the mass in grams and kilograms, right? Basically, while working in laboratories and while actually doing the experiments, we cannot actually talk about an atomic mass unit because we cannot talk about each and every atom, okay? Because we cannot see each and every atom. We basically can see matter around us, which is a cluster of many different atoms together, right? So that is why we need kind of a bridge, okay? A bridge which connects these two worlds, the one which is atomic mass unit and the one which is in grams and kilograms, and that bridge, my friends, is called a mole. Now let us discuss what is a mole. So if I talk about atoms of carbon, if I talk about one atom of carbon, of course I cannot see it, okay? 2, I cannot see it. 3, 4, I cannot see, feel or touch it, okay? But if I talk about these many atoms of carbon together, I can not only see, feel and touch it, I can also measure their mass in grams, and it comes out to be equal to 12 grams, okay? So this number which you see on your screen right now is actually called a mole. So basically this mole is just a number, and it's called an Avogadro's number because Avogadro was the scientist who gave this number, right? It is nothing but 6.022 into 10 to the power 23, and just like 1 dozen bananas is equal to 12 bananas, similarly 1 mole of anything is equal to 6.022 into 10 to the power 23 of anything, okay? It can be 1 mole pen, 1 mole pencils, okay? But because this is such a very, very high number, we cannot talk about macroscopic things in such high quantities, okay? We can only talk about things like atoms which are not macroscopic, and because of this number is very, very extremely large, okay? Also, it's very important to understand what is so special about this Avogadro's number and why 6.022 into 10 to the power 23 is the only number which is the Avogadro's number. So, well, this is a table in NCERT which you guys absolutely have to remember, and this table talks about the mass of various atoms. Okay, so hydrogen atom is having the mass of 1 AMU. Carbon atom is having the mass of 12 AMU. So basically, it is talking about the mass of atoms. Okay, something which we can't see, feel, or touch. Okay, so basically, for example, nitrogen atom is having the mass of 14 U or 14 AMU. Okay, but if I take not 1, not 2, but 6.022 into 10 to the power 23 atoms of nitrogen, the mass is going to be 14 grams. So whatever is the mass in U, it is going to be in grams if I take these many number or Avogadro number of nitrogen atoms. Okay, similarly, if I take Avogadro number of hydrogen atoms, the mass is going to be 1 gram. Okay, if I take Avogadro number of carbon atoms, the mass, as you see in the last slide, was equal to 12 grams. Okay, so this is special about Avogadro's number because it basically acts as a bridge between U or the atomic mass unit and the grams, which is the gram atomic mass, which we basically use on a daily basis. How do atoms exist? So we know how clearly atoms are unimaginably small, but the macroscopic world that you see around you is something that you can see, feel and touch, which clearly means that atoms are not present just like that, but in clustered forms. So whenever there is an atom, it can form a cluster or a reiteration of many atoms together, and then what we get is called an element. As you know, there are a total of 118 elements in periodic table. Now, it's also possible that atoms combine with same or different atoms to form molecules because most atoms do not exist independently. So for example, one atom of oxygen can combine with 2 atoms of hydrogen to form a molecule of water. Now when a molecule is clustered to a very high extent, what we get is called a compound. So to clearly differentiate between what is an atom and what is a molecule, well, atoms are the reiterating or a smallest species of any element, whereas a molecule is a reiterating or a smallest species of a compound. Now, the number of atoms constituting a molecule is called its atomicity. For example, on the screen you can see various numbers of different molecules. The first one is carbon dioxide, second one is water, then we have ammonia, then we have oxygen gas, then we have argon gas, and finally we have hydrogen gas. So as you can see, all of these are different molecules. In the first case, in case of carbon dioxide, we have three different atoms together. We have two atoms of oxygen and one atom of carbon combining together, and that is why its atomicity is 3 and it is called triatomic. Similarly, water has the atomicity of 3 again and it is again triatomic. Ammonia on the other hand has 4 different atoms combining together, and that is why the atomicity here is 4 and it is tetraatomic. Oxygen gas again has 2 atoms combining, and that is why it is diatomic. Argon gas is only made up of a single atom and there is no formation of molecule here, and that is why it is monoatomic, having the atomicity of 1. Hydrogen gas has the atomicity of 2 because it has 2 atoms combining together. So other than forming molecules, atoms can also form charged species which are called ions. As we know, charges are of two types, positive and negative. Positively charged ions are called cations, whereas negatively charged ions are called anions. We all know how we have a periodic table, and it is divided into 3 parts or 3 different type of elements, which is metals, nonmetals and metalloids. The red color ones are the metals and the blue color ones are the nonmetals. Also, it is important to understand that metals always form positively charged ions or cations, and nonmetals always form negatively charged ions or anions. For example, sodium metal forms a positively charged with a charge of +1, and that is called a sodium cation. Similarly, chlorine forms a negatively charged ion which is called a chloride anion. Something which is important here to understand is that always metals and their charges are going to have an IUM or ium in the end. For example, sodium has IUM in the end. Magnesium also has IUM. Beryllium, calcium, all the metals or positively charged species or species which have tendency to form positive charges are always going to have IUM in the end. Whereas nonmetals in their negative state will have an IDE or ATE in the end. For example, chloride has IDE, fluoride, bromide, iodide, all these elements when they form a negatively charged species have an IDE or in some cases ATE at the end. When these two oppositely charged species combine together, we get a molecule, and this kind of a molecule, since it is made up of two different kind of charges together, is called an ionic compound because it is made up of two kinds of charges, positive and negative charges. So cations and anions combine to form ionic compounds, and here we have various examples of different ionic compounds: sodium chloride, calcium oxide, magnesium chloride. So we can clearly understand that sodium, calcium and magnesium are the metals here because they have an IUM and they must be having a positive charge, whereas chlorine, oxygen and again chlorine do have a negative charge, and that is why they are nonmetals. Now let's talk about this 2 which is hanging out here in MgCl2. Well, this 2 is because of the charges. There is a table in NCERT which you absolutely have to remember, and remember the charges that every metal or non-metal has. It's clear to understand how non-metals are always going to have a negative charge, metals are always going to have a positive charge, but what amount of positive and negative charge they have, that is something which you have to remember. Now in case of, let's say, magnesium and chloride, magnesium has a positive charge of +2, whereas chloride have a positive charge of -1. So how do we make a chemical formula out of magnesium and chloride? Well, what we'll do is we'll just list the symbols and the charges. So magnesium has a charge of +2 and chlorine has a charge of -1. Now what we're going to do is just cross multiply these numbers together in a sort of way, and we have to just remove the sign. Positive and negative sign has to just go away, and then we get an MgCl2, and this is the chemical formula of magnesium chloride. Similarly, we have different examples. In case of aluminium oxide, the charge on aluminium is +3, whereas that of oxygen is -2. After cross multiplication and removal of charges, we get Al2O3, which is the molecular formula or the chemical formula for aluminium oxide. Again, we have H2S, and similarly we have charges and the cross multiplications which lead to the chemical formula of these. We have example of NaNO3, example of calcium hydroxide, and we have various other examples in NCERT which we can practice. But first and foremost thing is to remember the table which I just showed in one of the slides. Now you all can head off to EduRev, practice the test and read the notes, and thank you so much for watching.